Hello and welcome once again to the third part in this Premier Injury series. This has been a deep dive into the Premier League data to explain some trends that we expect to see towards the end of the season. But as always, we give the caveat that anything can and does happen in the beautiful game. And just before we jump into how all this amazing data applies to FPL, can I remind you to like, share and subscribe, and also comment below if you've enjoyed this content. It really helps us kind of judge and understand if this content is applicable to you, helping you with your teams, and just helps us help you moving forward. But yeah, this is the third and final part to our discussions. Check out parts 1 and 2. It's all free on the YouTube channel, and you can read the articles that go with it as well on the Premier Injuries Insight. But we're going to talk about how the data that we've looked at applied to the final few weeks of the season, and maybe an opportunity to replicate the big man himself here, Mr. Ben Dinnery, with his differential abilities. So yeah, first of all, Ben, I want to start with the discussion point about maybe concentrating captains and transfers around teams who play bottom 3 to 4 sides as much as you can. Now, the ones that I picked out are Wolves, who play 3 of the bottom 4 and quite close together in a block as well. So I think that maybe if they score 1 or 2 in one game, it might, give them a bit of buoyancy going into those other ones. Arsenal actually play all 4, which is quite fascinating. Maybe somebody like Lacazette, Aubameyang might be an interesting one to get in. Burnley play 3 out of the 4, which I think might do well for them defensively, because we'll get onto that. And then Leicester, during the 32 to 35 game week period, there's a good time there where they play a few teams that have been conceding a lot of goals. So maybe not necessarily the bottom sides. So in that group that we've kind of described there as the relegation battlers, the relegation fodder, but they do play teams like Crystal Palace. They're in there as well. So first and foremost, what do you think about this tactic of captaining in those game weeks? Or are you more of a believer in the captains of just premium assets?
I'm certainly not a believer in captaining just premium assets for the sake of that. You know me, forever the differential. And look, I try to teach, treat every game week, every fixture on its own merits. I do think there's a little bit of a caveat with regards to those teams playing against those sides in the bottom 3 or bottom 4, dependent on which game week it is actually playing during the run-in. I think maybe once, if we're talking about maybe game weeks 30 to 34, where teams may still feel they've got a fighting chance of survival. They've maybe, got a little bit to play for still, but maybe as you approach in week 35, 36, 37, they could effectively be dead rubbers. So I think every game week and every fixture, there's got to be context in and around that. Yeah, and we know the data. I really like the thought process with regards to Burnley, and I would definitely, my focus would shift towards those Burnley defensive assets, as opposed to looking at what they could produce up top against these teams. I think it's far more likely you're going to get bigger returns at that. But I do have reservations maybe with regards to Wolverhampton Wanderers this season, just given that they've been fairly indifferent in terms of their performances on the pitch. The arrival of William Jose in the January window hasn't maybe come to bear fruit yet. We've seen Fabio Silva, he's got the weight of that price tag hanging over his shoulder. He's still a young lad learning his craft. And look, I don't think it's as easy as being able to sort of just flick a switch and say, right, well, we're playing against a inferior opposition. Let's go out there and step things up and really attack and go for the 3 points. I think once we're at 30 games in, 30 game weeks down the season, it's I think that the team is set up there for the rest of the campaign, and Wolves just haven't produced enough for me. But look, I think there are And again, not only just context of the league and the actual fixtures, but where you are in it and what your philosophies and strategies may be. If overall ranks, depending on your position, if you're looking to maintain, but if you're, maybe looking to try and make a move, then, go for those differentials, go for those players to try and spot, with low ownership. Because if the bang, you're going to get a bigger move out of it.
And what you're explaining there about the certain teams, I do agree with. And this is the kind of difficult thing for me, Ben, is because Wolves goals per game this season 0.07. Goals per game 0.97, and then they've conceded 1.31. And so they've not been good defensively. They've not been great going forward. It's not been a good season for them. Burnley 0.76 goals per game and 1.28 goals conceded per game. So they're actually slightly better, Burnley, defensively than Wolves. But with the kind of Wolves position, I think Pedro Neto almost does well no matter what. He's been the shining light in that team. He's probably the only asset that I would look at. I'm not too sure if I would consider defensive assets, because that would mean doubling or trebling up on Wolves assets, and I just don't believe in them that much. So there is that fixture swing, and I think the thing with Wolves is, if they are going to score goals in these games where statistically they are much more likely to score goals, it will be Pedro Neto that's going to be involved. He has been that player this season. So on that situation, yeah, maybe Neto, but apart from that, I wouldn't be looking at too many others just yet. With Arsenal, so they've done all rightish this season in terms of it. They've got a positive kind of goal difference, which is shocking, but it's good news for Arsenal fans. They've done quite well. The problem is they're not seeing these clean sheets out, and it's kind of a similar story to Wolves in that they've not been matching data and performances. So over the last few weeks, people have kind of gone, oh yeah, Arsenal have had a great upturn in defensive data, but they've not been matching it with clean sheets. So yes, they've not let in a lot of goals, but they've let in one goal every game week. So maybe not defensive assets with them. But the goals per game, 1.38, is quite enticing for these games that they're playing. So they're playing Sheffield United in game week 31, Fulham in game week 32, and then they play Newcastle game week 34 and West Brom game week 35. But there's also the Crystal Palace game in there and the Brighton game as well. We've talked about how good Brighton have been with their underlying data, but they too have conceded 1.24 goals per game this season. They haven't done that well. And kind of looking at all those defences that they're playing, all these teams are conceding like 1.2 goal plus per game. It's enticing stuff. So with those two teams there, Ben, would you be only looking at attacking assets, or do you think that maybe Arsenal might have a defensive asset that you'd be considering?
Difficult. I mean, one asset that has piqued my attention throughout the season is Kieran Tierney. I do like him, full of energy, breaking down the wings. He's got a final pass in him. He can unlock doors. But again, I'm just not too. I've been burnt by Oba this season. I think I held on to him for a little bit too long at the beginning of the campaign. Really expected Arsenal to do well. We've seen Oba shift from, that forward role to reclassified as a midfielder, and everybody thought, that was great. We'll steam into him, and most were off in the first few weeks. I think I held on and got rid just as he went through that little bit of a spell. He is the captain. He is their talisman. But we've seen in the North London derby, he turning up late for his game. I suspect that it maybe isn't the first time this has happened. Mikel Arteta stamped his foot down, really, showed that who the boss is. Nobody's bigger than the club, which is good. But for me, you just need more from Aubameyang. I really think we do. And Lacazette, I just feel there's something missing there as well. and that always puts me off Arsenal. And I'm looking and I'm wanting to get players from Arsenal because I quite like them, but there's nobody in that team that fills me with enough confidence for us to be able to say, well, yeah, you're worth a punt. We've got European competition to consider. Now, will that impact on Mikel Arteta's starting 11? I think we did see, heavy rotation, and it was quite surprising because he stayed strong in the Europa League, and then the Premier League game on the Sunday, brought around sort of a host of changes. I think it was 5 or 6 the following game week. So maybe that was a little bit of an indication that his priorities are shifting slightly. I do like Odegaard. He is one that I do have in other formats. It looks like, he's nailed down his place in that team. He's enjoying his football. It doesn't look as if, well, we're not sure at this point. He said he would like to stay at Arsenal, but it's something which Real Madrid at this moment in time aren't willing to entertain. But as we all know, it's about the money. And, so in that regard, you're looking at a player who has something to play for and will continue to hopefully deliver until game week 38.
And just an evaluation before we go on to the Leicester discussion point. But we have included here because, they are on the table in that bottom kind of group bracket of teams, Fulham. But they've done quite well, 5 clean sheets since game week 21. Their XG conceded is down. They're looking a much better team. Do you think it's right to include the Cottagers in that group of teams there? Because, they are in that place. And so we do have to run with the data that we've got. Or is this maybe a situation where the average output should not be included in some of these outliers?
Like I say, context is everything. And I think just looking at the wider circle as well. I mean, on the flip side to that, we've just touched upon Arsenal. But if you recall, those teams in, I think it was 7th, 8th and 9th, were at greatest risk of suffering a downturn in performance from this game week 30 to, up to game week 38, so that includes Arsenal themselves. Now, like I say, if Mikel Arteta decides that there's a shift in priorities in terms of how he's setting up his team, then that could have an adverse effect on their points per game. So, look, the teams who are inherently at the bottom towards the end of the season, they're there for a reason, because they're just not good enough overall. Yes, they have made tweaks, and yes, they have improved. But I seen them last time out. Was it Leeds United? I think game week 29 on the Friday when Fulham lost 2-1, and there was a little bit of endeavour there. There's a little bit of fight. They're certainly playing for Scott Parker, but they, like a lot of the teams down the bottom, they're struggling to take chances and opportunities, and they're not scoring enough goals, and that would always be my worry. That, for me as a Newcastle supporter, that's what that's the hope that I'm taking from it. We should have Callum Wilson back, and we should have San Maxim back. In that team, we've got game changers, game winners, people who take chances. Fulham, West Brom, how many times we talked about West Brom's performances of late? Look at Sheffield United. I think Sheffield United may have lost 12 games this season by a 1-goal margin. Not massively different to how they were last year. Fine margins. You disrupt that back line and you concede a couple more goals, and you don't have the firepower to be able to get yourself back into these contests.
Yeah, it's one to watch out for, and I think that is the next point. But just before we get into that, and you've really kind of done well to highlight, there's a lot of kind of foibles to this data. It's like a puzzle to kind of put this together, because Arsenal, yes, they do play all 4 teams, but then because they're vying for a European spot, maybe we shouldn't consider them. They, statistically speaking, they don't score as many goals from this game week 30 to 38 period. But yeah, just finally, with Leicester, as I said, their game week 32 to 35 period, they don't have any distractions. They're kind of fully focused now on the Premier League. Could that be a beneficial thing during that really good little run there? I think it's sandwiched between a very poor run and kind of looking at the data of the end of season run. They're in the bottom half, so they do have a lot of reds in there. They play Man City, West Ham, Man United, Chelsea and Tottenham. But in between that run there, those 4 game weeks, in game weeks 32 to 35, they've got West Brom, Crystal Palace, Southampton and Newcastle. All of these teams have conceded at least 1.6 goals per game this season. For somebody like Jamie Vardy, that is a little bit enticing. Maybe the likes of other players if they're coming back into the squad, but they have had injuries. So there is a lot of discussion points here. And also, there is the point that they are also a European contender, so they might be wanting to protect their position going in to the end of the season there. Yes, they're sitting third, but they'll want to maybe play a conservative style of play, which is reflected in the data that we've looked at in terms of teams in those upper echelons, not quite in the title hunters, but game week 30 to 38 actually sees them score less and defend more. So what are your kind of feelings about Leicester City, maybe for that little short jaunt?
There's a lot of belief from Brendan Rodgers, both in personnel and being able to go out there and secure a European place. Ideally, that would be Champions League, and maybe they won't have a better opportunity to be able to do so than how things are lined up for them at this moment in time. With the exception of Manchester City, there's nobody really being able to consistently put results together. Although you could maybe argue that Ollie seems to pull a few out the bag when the backs are against the wall. I do like Leicester, and personnel issues may determine on how Brendan wants to set up his team. I think ideally they would like to play on the front foot, continue playing as they always have done. The explosiveness of Vardy, the creativity of Maddison, sprinkling a little bit of Harvey Barnes in that. Ayoze Perez done well on his return from injury as well. You've got Tielemans, who looks like he's coming into back into a little bit of form. Then that's a good attacking Leicester lineup. You take a few of those players out, and you're losing something. If you haven't got James Maddison in your team, you're losing one hell of a player. He shouldn't be too far away, but likewise, a return to training would be a return to play, which is not a return to performance. So he could be managed, and we've seen what happened during last season's run-in when Leicester picked up a couple of injuries and their severe downturn in output. So that was reflected in the absence of James Maddison and also Ben Chilwell were the two big ones, and I think Soyuncu maybe was suspended as well for a couple of games. But Leicester are looking good. I think they're full of confidence. Like I say, they've got that belief. With who we got in that backline, Johnny Evans, Soyuncu in there. Then you may be looking at, is it Luke Thomas, maybe Castagna. You've got Ricardo Pereira coming back. So they've got a good. I think they're pulling together a decent squad, and to be able to to cope with losing one or two players, which historically they haven't been able to do. But like I say, that will determine on how maybe they play and how they set up, and whether they want to go really on the offensive, or maybe try to play more as what inherently known as on the counter. So again, looking at context, looking at what's happening in and around, but the no distractions of European football will certainly help with regard, in terms of maybe having a more settled team, putting the hours in on the training pitch, because you can actually go down and do some proper training, do some proper work with regards to tactics, and as opposed to maybe, and that's going to be the big advantage. You're not going to have players who are fatigued as much, and you're not traveling here and there and everywhere.
The thing is, for me, kind of on this discussion point from the data that we extracted, looking at their last 8, so we're kind of looking at their last 8 to help build into their next 8. Leicester have been pretty good in attack, arguably second, third best attack in the Premier League. They scored the third best amount of goals since game week 21. The XG is fairly good, and XG non-penalty, so none of their goals have actually come from a penalty, so it's kind of all been good creativity. But the worrying thing, and maybe Brendan Rodgers will be well aware, and maybe this will translate into the phenomena that we identified of less goals scored, more steely defence in those European things, is that they've only had 3 clean sheets since game week 21. They've had bottom half of the table XG conceded, and yes, they do have good personnel. Maybe Brendan Rodgers will want to go back to basics to secure Champions League for next season. So it's an interesting talking point, and this is why there's a lot of problems with them in my mind of, do I get them in, do I not get them in, because frankly they have that ability to do both, defend well and attack well, but they've just not had their groove recently, and a lot of it has been down to injuries, and it will be how quickly those players can get back on form. But let's move it into the next talking point, and an interesting one is, from looking at our data, some people would say, should we be playing 3 at the back because we expect an upturn in goals? But what I would say is the biggest increase in goal scoring actually happens when there's nothing to play for. So it's probably a little bit early to kind of invest at the back for now. I think one of the first things for people to do is to identify teams that will quickly come to the fore and have nothing to play for. So to maybe avoid their defensive players, but also bring in some attacking players that are playing against them, or maybe they're attacking players, because depending on which groups you look at, the defence pretty much across the Premier League gets worse as soon as there's nothing to play for, which is not surprising. But some groups do really well in scoring more as well. They let the handbrake off and do well. I think one of the first ones that I'm keeping an eye on is Crystal Palace. They're basically safe now. They're on that 37-point mark, and if you look at one of our videos, the first one, 36 points is statistically the kind of safe mark. They don't have much to play for now. They're not going to get a European spot. They're going to coast towards the end of the season, and a lot of that squad as well are without contract towards the end of the season. So what do they have to play for? They're not trying to impress their club. Maybe a new suitor, but yeah, I think Crystal Palace are going to be one of the teams that maybe are what we call like the whipping boys of the Premier League towards the end of the season. They've already let in a lot of goals this season. I think there's going to be a big upturn there. But there's a few other teams that are going to be near that mark of not much to play for. They're kind of secure, and you just have to kind of watch out for them. Maybe in Aston Villa. Aston Villa were having European aspirations a little bit earlier, and they do have a game in hand against some teams in the league, but they seem to be a little bit off those European spots. They'll be happy that they're well secure for this season. Maybe they will realise that was their goal and kind of be content with, that mark that they're at in the season. So they're kind of 2 that I've identified. Ben, are there any others that people need to almost be looking at that you think, in terms of nearing their season-long goals or coming towards the end of the season, that they don't really have much to play for?
Before going to that, you make an interesting point with regards to Crystal Palace. And your comments set me mind racing to a conversation that I had with Simon Brundish on a particular, I think it was Strength Lab podcast. And we were talking about certain managers within the Premier League and how he had tracked them over their whole career. And what he had done, he had aggregated their league positions and their points total per team, and how there was this common almost misconception that Roy Hodgson has done a great job at Crystal Palace, when maybe Alan Pardew, I think, who had took Palace up to certainly a top 10 finish, at certain point was, and I'm not a fan of his by any means, but you know, he was lambasted and he was this, that, and the other. And then was it Frank de Boer came in and he lasted 6 games, and Royce, you know, saved the season. What he said, the data for Roy Hodgson is, out of his whole career, he's never finished really more than 5 points out of a particular points total in any campaign, in any season, in any league. And that isn't around that sort, I'm sure it's around about that 43 point margin. So if you look at where Palace are now in terms of a 37 point, and if you were to say, you know, well, we know ish that Roy Hodgson's going to be finishing in and around that 43 points, give or take, you know, that would only suggest that Palace have maybe got couple of wins and a couple of draws left in them this season. So again, you know, that supports that, maybe that theory that, you know, Palace maybe sort of will kick back and consider this as a job done. I think, you know, maybe in the past, or what they could have been, you know, it might have been playing for Wilfried Zaha, and how can we keep him at the club? But I think that ship has now sailed, and I think he could be off in the summer, and there may be some kind of rebuild there. An interesting one for me, Southampton. They're a team who obviously started off very well, carried over great form from Project Restart, and you know, everybody was hailing the acquisition or the club for keeping faith in Hasselhütten. And then they suffered 1 or 2 sort of injury setbacks. They've had a little bit of dip in form, and they've got sucked in and around, you know, that sort of bottom half. Now, you know, you would expect or hope for them to sort of, you know, they've had their lull. We should have Danny Ings back. James Ward-Prowse has done okay for England. You know, grabbed himself a goal. We are recording before England's third and final qualifier on the Wednesday, so you know, he may have added another 1, 2, or possibly even 3 to that. Who knows how many hat-tricks of free kicks he may get. But I do like Southampton. I think that's a team, you know, on the up that I would like to look at. The other one that I would still be wary of is Brighton. You know, despite that good result against Newcastle, we've talked about them over the course of the season. You know, are you really that good? At some point, you need to start delivering. And if media reports are to be believed, then there are questions being asked with regards to Graham Potter and whether he will be at the club post 2020, 2021. So we will, you know, that's something else to throw in. And if players feel that managers are being unfairly judged or treated, you know, then that can have a dramatic effect on morale within the changing room. I know the likes of Trossard, who got a couple of goals for Belgium, will probably come back absolutely buzzing. But again, you concede an early goal in game week 30, and you know, all of a sudden it's backs against the wall. You're looking down, and they could easily be dragged down in there.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, please do revisit or look at the articles to kind of look at how we think. But Southampton might do well because they're just outside that group of teams that we think will have a huge kind of regression. And unfortunately, one of the teams that we do expect because of where they're placed is your boys Newcastle. I mean, fingers crossed they don't get sucked in or even get pulled down into that relegation zone. But we have to be honest, the data has told us that they're the group to watch out for in terms of regressions and big problems towards the end of the season. But yeah, so let's talk through it, because the European place hunting sides, usually after game week 30, do have a downturn in goals, as you explained there, about Arsenal, about Leicester, but their defence stays solid. So maybe in these sorts of situations, a defender from those sorts of teams is all right to hold, but maybe not banking so much on their attacks. The best attack to kind of hold in that game week 30 to 38 period, and also when they've got nothing to play for as well, are the higher ups, the title contenders. So at the moment that would be Manchester City and Manchester United, but depending as well, Leicester might push on. I mean, some of their data suggests that they do have that ability, so also keep an eye on them as well. So those are the kind of three that might be the title hunters, although realistically, again, Manchester City have kind of almost won it by this point at game week 30. So that is also a discussion of they might then fall into Man City, Man United and Leicester. Once they're kind of secure in those positions, they might go into the style of nothing to play for. You really do have to kind of manage this. Mid-table teams also improve defence game week 30 onwards, so that kind of fits in with our beliefs of Burnley. They're mid-table, they might improve, and also they do have that ability to kind of play all right. But again, they are near the relegation mark, so you just have to kind of fit around it. It's all about context with these teams. But the fun thing is when there's nothing to play for, those are the teams to target for more goals and also more goals conceded. The big point, though, that I kind of want to talk about, Ben, is we do talk about the title hunter assets, you know, those teams at the top. Leicester, Man City, Man United. We're probably grouping those three at the moment because Chelsea look a little bit off the mark there. But in terms of it, they're the teams with the strongest data, but there's also the most risk of rotation with these players. A 20% increase in squad rotation going from game week 30 to 38. I think Man City are probably the ones to avoid, maybe apart from Diaz, I think, or Edison. He might be all right to own as well. But their outfield players and people like Cancelo, that's really worrying me now because they are pushing for Carling Cup or whatever it's called now, Carabao Cup, FA Cup and Champions League. They want a historic quadruple and it's well within their ability. Man United, you can probably trust more in their 11, and Leicester as well. Once they kind of sorted out their injuries, you know who to expect to be starting. So yeah, how can we get around the squad rotation risk, this 20% increase that we worry about kind of coming towards that game week 38? Is it just having a strong bench? Is that the only answer?
That certainly helps. But it doesn't help if you're looking at premium assets and, you know, and those premium assets missing out. Again, the huge red flags at Manchester City. You know, I don't think there was a time when you thought Kevin De Bruyne was untouchable. I don't think that's the case now because other players in different positions have demonstrated that they can deliver for Pep. And, you know, he has their trust implicitly. You know, we just see how Gundogan stepped up in recent times. So, you know, that is a big worry for me. And yes, Ruben Diaz probably looks, you know, the most likely to start in that back line, but I wouldn't expect him to start every game. I really would not. Certainly, say you've got Laporte and you've got Stones, and then you've got the Champions League, and there will be rotation, and there will be players rested, different setups. You know, he could go with a 3-5-2. I know he likes the 4-3-3. You just don't know with Pep. That's the thing. That's the difficulty. And you know, he loves to throw in the curveball. If I was, I mean, I do like Leicester. I don't like Vardy because I want more from Vardy. I need him to, you know, I don't need him to touch the ball 3 times and score a goal if I'm watching the game. I need him to touch the ball 100 times and at least have us on the edge of my seat and think, oh, you know, you should have scored 4. Not, oh, well, you had 2 touches and you scored 1. Because for 92 minutes of the game, you're out of it and I'm bored and I don't want to watch it. I did like, and I do like Tielemans, particularly when James Maddison isn't in that Leicester team. He takes a lot more responsibility, he takes a lot more risk. He's on penalties if Vardy isn't on the pitch, and his output is much improved. So I do like Tielemans as a little bit of a differential. But again, I struggle with Leicester as I do with Manchester United. Is there one player in that team where you say, yes, I need them? I'm not just sure. At United, historically, over the last year, you would say Bruno. And do you just have Bruno in to consolidate, or to celebrate when he's banging? Martial picked up a little bit of a knock, but his form of late has been indifferent, to say the least. He cuts a very frustrated figure, and when he's frustrated, again, he's a player he's never a 7. He's a 5 or he's a 9, and more often than not in recent times, he's been that 5. Rashford, we know that he's carrying this niggling shoulder issue. Maybe that's affected his form of late. He's currently got a foot injury. So do I want to be investing in the likes of Rashford? No. Is it an opportunity maybe plumb for Cavani? Because we know United will want to hold on to that second place spot. They're still fighting. So, is this an opportunity for Cavani to be able to, because I'm not sure, I mean, you might know, but I'm sure that Cavani hasn't signed that contract extension as yet. If that's the case, he will still want to put himself out in the shop window, and he will still feel he's got a point to prove that he can still deliver at the highest level. And with those two players, like I say, just struggling for maybe a little bit of form and fitness, maybe this is his opportunity to really, take his season by the scruff of the neck and do some damage for United.
For me, it's a difficult one with Cavani because you don't know whether he's going to start. And this is the whole point, is this game week 30 to 38. I want people that are definitely going to start. Vardy, he pretty much does start week in, week out. Whereas I like the shout of Cavani. And when he's been on the pitch for Man United, he's done such a fantastic job. But it's that certainty if he will start. So that's probably a bit too differential, Mr. Dinnery, for me. But I still recognise how it's a good shout. And the interesting thing for me is, with my wildcard team, the makeup is very different to what I would expect it to be towards this end of the season. But I don't have a Man City midfielder. I've only got one Man City asset. They are the best team in the league, but at the moment the rotation risk is too much. The other thing that you have to throw in here is the COVID effect. Now, obviously, with yourself, you kind of see this with the injury record, but do you think this will translate also not just from injuries with number of rotations maybe going up even more than usual, but do you think there might also be an increase on the output that we're expecting? So at the moment, we're expecting maybe mid-table teams to score a little bit more but have an improved defence. Do you think they will score much more and have a slightly less improved defence? Or what kind of changes in the usual data? Because this is going to be an anomalous end to the season. What kind of changes do you expect from the usual trends?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of understate the influence of maybe, fatigue around, this stage of the season. We're talking about a long, condensed program with a quick turnaround. And let's not forget as well, which seems to have been almost brushed under the carpet, international players playing 3 games during this 2-week period seems crazy. I can maybe understand World Cup qualifying matches for teams during this period, but teams playing friendlies on top of everything else that's going on, that then we talk about load management, player management. I seen a post, I think, is it Gini Wijnaldum maybe played the most minutes for Liverpool this season, certainly of all the midfielders. And, he goes away for the national team. The Netherlands go to, was it Gibraltar, I think, maybe on Tuesday evening to win 7-0, and Gini Wijnaldum plays 95 minutes. I mean, come on, there's got to be, a little bit of sense and understanding about, the demands that are being placed on these players, particularly those in the Premier League, that we know is the quickest and the most dynamic of all of the, the leagues in the world in terms of those high intensity sprints. So, when you factor in fatigue, it's not just the chance of increased injury incidents, but it's those decision making. It's the wrong decision, or it's the correct decision, but made, too late. And, when you're talking about some of the world's best players, the best strikers of the ball, then teams will capitalize on that and you will be punished. We often talk about the gulf in class really between the Championship and the Premier League, and there's mistakes that you can make in the Championship, which will go unpunished. In the Premier League, it's very unforgiving. And like I say, those players who are inherently going to be fatigued, and they're going to have maybe one eye on the Euros as well. So they may not be playing at optimal levels, or they may be sidetracked, or they may be distracted in terms of, I'm not going to go in for that tackle, I might hurt myself, or I might not make that decision because, I've got other things going on. Then, there's a possibility there, and there's opportunities for, supporters to see a lot more goals. And I think that's where my focus will shift in terms of FPL, maybe more with those attacking outputs as opposed to maybe where I've seen, built my season on, quite a solid little defense. I think that'll shift for me, and I'll go all Keegan-esque and go for goal.
I love it. And I would love it if, you if you did well towards the end of the season.
I would love it.
Total back into the Keegan Dinnery approach. That can be the differential this season. But yes, that comes to the end of our discussions for this part 3. And I'll just remind people once again, we put a lot of heart and effort into this for the FPL community here. We've got some fantastic articles on this on the website, and the videos there are free for you to enjoy. And so many thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, share and subscribe, because we want to continue making this content for you, and we like to know that we're doing the good job there. So it's all good indicators. But yes, we hope that this helps with your teams going from game week 30 to 38. We wish you the best of luck, and I'm just going to hand it to Mr. Big Ben, Mr. Differential himself, to sign us out.
Yes, a lot of blood, sweat and beers. Jason, look, take this opportunity to once again just thank you for all of your hard work, your effort. Believe me, guys, he's put so many hours into research. All of the numbers that underpin those, all 3 parts of this. So it is greatly appreciated. And it'll be fantastic just to hear your comments, your feedback on, what you thought of the content. Because again, that helps us take things forward. We know that we're creating the right kind of content for you, and hopefully, fingers crossed, 1 or 2 little nuggets that we can pick out along the way can help you to mini league success, or maybe to your best overall rank finish. But from now until the end, good luck. We will be producing all of our other regular content, so keep on tuned in and follow our social media channels. But for now, the run-in 3-parter done.